Hello to parents, carers of Year 11 students and Year 11 students themselves. I'm Mr. Littleford, Head of Year 11, and this is the first video which we're producing in order to support parents, carers and students for the GCSE examinations for summer 2021. This video is the first of many that will be coming out over the future weeks and months, with this particular video focusing on the revision cycle and the Pomodoro revision technique, which will provide students with a clear and effective strategy in how to approach their revision. I hope you find it useful and incorporate some of the strategies for students within school, but also at home for students when they're doing their extra revision and for parents to support as well. So in terms of being ready for revision for Year 11 students, we're already underway at Grove, even though we're into week 4, and there's lots of things that are in place which I'd just like to review with you. So to start off with, every student in Year 11 has access to a CGP How to Revise for GCSE book, which looks like this. This is being used in tutor times, and every Thursday in tutor time it's called Revision Club, where every student in Year 11 will be completing revision and or completing tasks and activities delivered by their tutors, which is based around this How to Revise GCSE book. This book is available for purchase via WisePay. It costs £2, which is a bargain because it's a really good book to show and support students in how they can revise. Once that money has been paid on WisePay, then students are welcome to take a copy from their tutor for themselves to keep. If students don't want to purchase a copy, then they can sign it out from their tutor and borrow it for it as long as they need. But just be wary that if they do lose the book, then they'll need to refund the £2 for the book. And as I mentioned in terms of Revision Club, the idea of this is to give sort of like a team ethos to Revision Year 11, the idea that every student's in it together in order to drive forward and to get the best results that they possibly can. So there's a bit of moral support there for them peers and also from their tutors as well. Also during Dear Time, which last year for Year 11 would have involved them reading a book, they have recall tasks, and I'll go on a little bit about recall tasks in a minute, which supports revision. So they are provided with little 10-minute tasks during Dear Time, which is based on learning that students have already completed, perhaps in Year 9 or Year 10, and the recall tasks are there for students to dredge that information from their memories in order to make it nice and fresh in their minds, so when it comes to answering questions they can access it easily and apply their knowledge so they can gain marks when it's put into an exam style question. As always, ongoing assessments will be happening in class. We're right in the midst of checking students' learning from the work they would have completed over the lockdown period, and any of these assessments are examples of revision where students will have little tests to go away which they need to revise for and to bring that memory to the table for any tests or examination questions which are being set by their teachers. Some subjects are starting to develop their own subject revision sessions after school to complement the revision aspect outside of lessons. This is where they can go and have extra sessions with their subject specialist. It may not be their teacher, but it'll be a subject specialist where they can secure their learning and then apply it as well, which will really incorporate into the learning and revision cycle, which I'll be talking about in a moment. Students also have access to a range of online platforms, for example Hegarty for maths, which is used within lessons and outside of lessons, GCSE Pod, which has lots of information which is Hegarty style for across all the subjects, and those teachers and subjects that use GCSE Pod will be directing their students towards the set pods, as they're called, in terms of them to access the right revision. And Seneca is also a very good online platform which is used widely across science, but also I know it's used widely in business studies as well. As I mentioned before, there's going to be some mock examinations after the October half term, so getting students into the routine, the idea and incorporating strategies for the mock examinations is going to be very crucial, especially as students want to prepare for those summer examinations. The more opportunities they get to experience that examination environment, and the better prepared they'll be for the summer when they sit their exams for real. And as you all know, for students to achieve the best grades possible, they need to be completing their revision at home and in their own time to secure the learning they've done in school, but also to go over and review their learning as well to ensure that they can fully understand all the information that's been given to them and that they can recall that information when answering exam questions. So that's everything that we've done so far at Grove, which we continue throughout the year in terms of Year 11 being ready for revision and for them to get the best grades possible moving forward. So what is revision? So revision is the process of going back over what's been learnt already and drawing on the information to answer a question effectively. So it's really important in terms of revision that students know exactly what they need to revise, in what order, but it's also important for them to know what they don't know so they can learn that information for them to revise it, for them to test their knowledge on that particular area, which is the part of the revision cycle which is on the next slide. The revision needs to be focused and targeted on an area of weakness, and this needs to be done as early as possible so the information can be learned, relearned and then retained and kept in students' memories. So one of the things that students like to do is revise information that they already know, which is great for them to keep that information nice and fresh. However, the students need to start to pay attention to the areas which they find difficulties in or they're unsure about, so they can get more opportunities to learn the information, to practice answering questions, or to practice an equation, for example, so when it comes to an exam question they can draw their knowledge and information to answer that question effectively. Revision is a process which is repeated over and over. The repetition of learning the information, then revising it, then testing the information, which is the revision cycle. This makes sure it stays in the long-term memory. So when students are sat in an exam and a question comes up on an area of content which they covered in Year 9, which would be over 2 years ago, because the students have repeated it over and over and over, they'll be embedded and kept in their long-term memory so they're able to access it to answer their exam questions. So revision environment, this is a question I get asked quite a lot about: how should students revise? So ideally a revision environment would look like this. So this is taken from the CGP revision book with a lovely random panda in the middle. So ideally the majority of students have an environment which should be free of distraction, should be nice and quiet, a clear work area where all the equipment, things like stationery, revision books, pens, paper, are easy to hand. A well-lit space so it's easy for students, to see their work, but also for them to stay focused and to stay engaged. The reduction of distractions, so mobile phones should be away, no TV on and like. However, I do appreciate that some students listen to music when they're revising, and there are some studies to say that in certain circumstances that can be beneficial, provided it's the right music. And basically they just need to have an area which they can have access to, which is clear, which is organised, and accessible to them. Appreciate in terms of some students might share bedrooms with family members, so a bedroom may not be an ideal situation. However, a kitchen table is ample space for students in order to do their revision. As long as they've got a space where they can focus, they're free of distraction, then that's the best learning environment for them. As I mentioned before, some students like to listen to music, and in some respects that's fine. However, that music shouldn't be too distracting, and as soon as your child is up and walking around and dancing, that the music's too distracting, they're not completing their revision. So I mentioned before about the revision cycle. So this is the revision cycle where students initially learn the information which they'll be examined on. The students then need to revise it, and then they need to test themselves with that information. And this is an ongoing process which goes round and round and round, which students will repeat for lots of different topics within their revision, but also when they've done that they need to go back and go over it again. So I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes just going through that revision cycle now. So the first stage of the revision cycle is students learning the information that they need to know for their exam for whatever subject. So this is where lessons are very, very important, because they've got the subject specialist teacher in front of them who will be delivering the information that they need to know in an engaging way and an effective way for students to remember that information and for them to retain it. This is also supported by completing homework tasks, which will reinforce the key messages and key learning objectives and points from the lessons. So students should be engaging in every single lesson to the best of their ability and completing the homeworks to supplement the learning that is going on in lessons. The first assembly Year 11s had with myself and Mrs. Taylor, I talked, and we both talked about making sure every lesson counts, and that's really an important factor for students to learn the information, because if students don't learn the information, they then can't revise it, so they're already behind there. So learning the information is crucial, and that starts in lessons. Before the revision starts, as I just mentioned, they need to have learned the information and make sure they understand the topic, and they do this by checking their lesson notes. So the information that's given on PowerPoint or from handouts. Books should be neat and tidy so students can access and understand the notes that they've written in lessons. If they're unsure of any content or anything the teacher's covering, then they should be asking for help and support with that. Going back and using those online platforms which we talked about before in terms of like Seneca and Hegarty, if there's aspects in a lesson which they're unsure of, then they need to be using those online platforms to get the information from a different source and a different media, as that might help the information to stick in their brains and retain it. The use of personalised learning checklists, or called PLCs, so these are completed by staff and students, where the key information that they need to know for a topic, a student will give it a rating of red, amber, green. So red means that they really struggle with that particular area of work. Amber means they're okay with it, but there's some areas which they're still unsure of. And green means that they're absolutely confident in that area. So those personalised learning checklists are really important for students to understand what they do, what they learned, what they do know, and also what they need to learn and to know as well. So from learning the information, the students should then be going into revision, starting to revise. So this should be focused on the red areas of the personalised learning checklist which I've spoken about. So this is the information which the students know but don't have a lot of confidence into it. So this is the first port of call, because we want to turn the reds on the personalised learning checklist to amber and turn those ambers into greens. So, and also what's also important is students tend to revise a subject when they should be revising a topic. So for example, if a student is doing maths revision, then they should spend their particular time focusing on, for example, fractions, not just maths. So what they're revising has to be very specific, and the students will have the information on the different areas that they need to cover. So in terms of revision, there's lots of different techniques which students can employ, such as condensing notes. This is on pages 10 to 11 of the revision booklet, the CGB green booklet, which talked about at the start. Mind maps are very popular, which allow students to present information in a very visual manner. Flowcharts, this is particularly good if students need to learn a process, for example, a chemical reaction in science. Flashcards, these are excellent for quick retaining of information. So on one side there's a question, and on the other side the card is turned over and the answers are there. So those are just some examples of some potential revision techniques which can be used. The important thing is at the revision stage, if there's anything which your child doesn't understand or still doesn't stick in their mind, they need to go back to the learning phase of the cycle to relearn that information. So that's when they need to go back to their teachers and ask for extra help, or go back to an online learning platform to recover that information. Then when they've recovered that information again, they feel that they've learnt it, they then go back to the revision stage. The final stage of the cycle is the test yourself, and this is the one area which students tend to miss out on. They'll do the learning in the lesson, they'll do the revision, but they don't actually test their memory and how they revise by not answering exam questions. The test yourself element is very important. So once your child is happy with their revision, they must test themselves on the information that they have just watched or learned, or the mind map they've completed, or the flowchart they've completed. So this testing should include, so it's one or more of these, quick fact recall questions where friends and families can ask questions. So using flashcards, for example, asking a question, getting your child then to verbally provide the answer or to write it down on sheets of paper. Completing exam questions and or past papers. These are available to students if they ask for them from their teachers. Using the mark schemes to mark their answers. So with every exam exam paper, there's something called a mark scheme, which is the answers for each question, and shows which answers are acceptable, which answers is called the benefit of doubt, which is where they may get a mark, depending on the examiner who's marking the paper. But also importantly as well, the common mistakes will be on that mark scheme as well. So it will show your child what things they should be avoiding to do for specific answers. If they've done a paper or an exam question and they don't get full marks, they should be going to the mark scheme, back to their lesson notes, and writing out the correct answers in a different colour for them to identify what was missing from their answers. And by doing that, they are then sort of filling the gap in their minds of the piece of information that they had missed. Also, it's important that those papers, they go back to their teachers to ask them have they marked it accurately, because the last thing we want is students not marking their papers correctly or misunderstanding something where they think they've actually potentially got 10 out of 10 for an answer and they've only got 5 out of 10 because they haven't used the mark scheme properly or they've been over generous in marking. It's really important that they go back to their teachers to see if they are willing to answer, to check the marking that they have done. Just like in the last phase of revision, if there's anything in the test yourself area which a child doesn't understand or can't remember from the revision, then they need to go back and re-revise that section and then retest their knowledge at a later date. So if they've got 5 out of 10, the extra 5 marks which they could have made up, they need to go back, re-revise that, and then test themselves again. So as I mentioned, that is the revision cycle in all of its glory, and this is just an overview of what that process looks like, just condensed in the 3 slides that we've just been through onto one sheet on the page there. The main point is between learning and revising, if students don't understand anything as part of the revising section, they need to go back and relearn that information. And when they go to the test yourself section, if there's things they're not getting right or missing, then they need to go back to do revision on that particular area and go back and retest themselves at a later date. So what I'm going to do now is talk about how we can blend that revision cycle in with the Pomodoro method of revision. So the Pomodoro method of revision is just basically a method of revision where a student will engage in revision or the learning stage of the revision cycle, or revision or testing themselves for a 25-minute block followed by a 5-minute break. So each 25-minute block is called one Pomodoro. Students will complete 4 25-minute blocks or 4 Pomodoros, and after each 25-minute block there's a 5-minute break, with the final 25 minutes having a 30-minute break at the end. So I'm just going to very briefly go through how we can blend the learning and the revision and the test yourself methods of the revision cycle in with the Pomodoro technique of revision. So the first stage, or the first Pomodoro, the first 25 minutes the student will take, will go back to the learning stage, where a student will, if they're in a lesson, they'll ask a teacher for help or support. They'll go back to their lesson notes, rereading or potentially redrafting sections of their work, so they're getting into the flow of whatever topic they're revising. And remember, this should be on specific pieces of work, not general subject work, a specific area. They might use online platforms such as Seneca and Heggerty in order to reignite that learning, and going back to their personalised learning checklist, their PLCs, to see the areas where they've got excellent understanding, where they're not too sure on a subject, or if they're in an area where they really struggle. The reds and the ambers, the parts of the learning that they'll need to go back to first, so they've got more opportunity to learn, to relearn, and to recap and to test themselves at a later date. So once the student's done the learning stage for the first 25 minutes, they would then have a 5-minute break. Just go to the revision stage. So this would be, if they've gone through the learning stage 25 minutes, they'd have a 5-minute break, then they move on to the revision stage, where they'd use some of the techniques which I've already outlined, which is in the Green CGP book, so condensing notes, using flow charts, mind maps, flashcards, or any other revision techniques that suits students. They would do 25 minutes of focus revision, again on a specific area, so they should be focusing on one area within a subject, not the whole subject itself, and they would engage in that revision session for that 25 minutes. Another 5-minute break. They would then move on to the test yourself phase. This is where they would go complete an exam questions. They might complete a section of a past paper. They might go back to the questions from revision books. They might have questions which have been given by their teachers. They would then do that for another 25 minutes. They then get another 5-minute break. And finally, the last 25 minutes or the last Pomodoro, they would use that test yourself, but the self-marking would then come in where they're using the mark schemes. They would then be writing in different colours the content that they missed or the answers they've got wrong. And then they then know for the next lesson they go and show that. After that fourth Pomodoro, or after that fourth 25 minutes worth of revision where they've done the self-marking after testing themselves, they would then take a 30-minute break. This requires some discipline from the child and from the students. Those 5-minute breaks then don't turn into 10, 15, 20-minute breaks. At this stage, a 5-minute break, I wouldn't be letting students anywhere near a mobile phone or a television. It would be a case of a quick toilet break, a quick drink, a little snack maybe, then move on to the next 25 minutes. So that's how that Pomodoro technique would work. 25-minute blocks for revision, followed by a 5-minute break, and after the fourth 25-minute session, students would get a 30-minute break. So just to review as we come to the end of this video, which I hope you found very, very useful, the revision cycle of learn, revise, test yourself is an ongoing cycle which students need to be completing consistently and need to be really focused in the areas of revision that they're doing. They need to learn the information first of all. If they haven't learned the information, they can't revise. So learning is really, really important. Lessons are vital for that. Completion of homework is vital for that. Students then go and revise it. They can use the CGP booklet, which I mentioned at the start, to support them with different revision techniques. If they're struggling in an area of their revision, they don't understand it, they need to go back to the learning phase to relearn that information. If they're happy with their revision, they then need to test themselves on the information that they've just revised. When they've tested themselves, they need to self-mark, making sure that they're accurate with their marking. Where they haven't got full marks, writing in answers different coloured pens to see where they've got wrong. And where they've got questions wrong or they've not got full marks, they need to go back and revise that particular section and then test themselves again on that at a later date to see if it's stayed in the long-term memory. And that revision cycle can be brought together by the Pomodoro technique of revision, which is completed in 25-minute blocks. So students can embed the learn, revise, test yourself phase into 4 25-minute blocks. In the learning stage, 25 minutes, have a break, toilet, get a drink, a snack, staying away from mobile phones, staying away from the television. Then they go into the revision stage, another 5-minute break. Then they test themselves, another 5-minute break. Then the self-marking element in the final 25 minutes. Then they have a 30-minute break for revision, and again they would then go into select a different subject, a different topic, and they would go through the same process again. Well, I hope you found this video informative and useful in terms of how to revise for your child and help them with support. If you've got any questions or any feedback regarding the presentation, please feel free to contact your child's tutor. Their email address is up on the slide at the moment, with my own email address at the bottom. And thank you as always for all your help and support with your child. As they grow, we really appreciate the levels of engagement that we have from students and from parents, and your support is always welcomed. And I hope you found this video useful, and I look forward to producing more videos in the future to support you and your child with their revision and exams for the future. Thanks for now. Speak to you soon. Bye bye.